Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics with a really fun project today. This is called the Fold and Stitch Blooms, another design from Poorhouse Quilt Patterns. Christine Poor is such an amazing designer. She is so popular. You may have remembered the Fold and Stitch wreath, which we did with a holiday collection. We also did it in Winter Sparkle, I think was the name of it. Really fun. People love making these, and well, Christine has another version, Fold and Stitch Blooms. We're going to be going over that today. When I saw the Bloom On collection from Maywood Studio, and this is called Fold and Stitch Blooms, I was like, this is a marriage made in heaven. Really pretty, fun and florally, and so we'll be using those fabrics today. And kind of like the Fold and Stitch wreath, I want to go over kind of the anatomy of how she refers to these things in her pattern. So the green part on our particular Fold and Stitch bloom is considered the top right here. And then this beautiful floral that's on the back is called the backing. And primarily you're seeing it on the front. So it feels a little weird to call it the backing when you're seeing it on the front. But that's because it starts back here. And once we sew the sections together, it kind of blooms to the top. Thus the name Fold and Stitch Blooms. And then the beautiful pink kind of gingham plaid there with a ditzy kind of tossed floral is the applique portion that we'll get into. Really fun to make these. And just like the Fold and Stitch wreath, Christine coordinated with Bozel to have a pre-cut product that just makes the process so precise, and it goes together really fast. These are a double-sided fusible hexagon shape. That is what we use to be able to make that. She gives you the option inside her pattern of using kind of more of a batting type material. If you want to do that, I think this is really the simplest way to go, and it makes the project come together in just a couple hours and really affordable. So we'll be using that product today. So the instructions inside her pattern will be, of course, giving you the measurements of the fabrics that you need to cut for each of the elements of that. But with the Bloom On collection, I really was intrigued by the border print that is part of that collection because I loved the intensity and grouping of the flowers that are in that kind of wallpaper stripe. So in our instance, I ended up using the fabric in a way I actually hadn't expected. So if you too are going to be grabbing this kit, we have some limited kits available. In order to do the Folded and Stitch Bloom with the Bloom On collection and this fabric, you can see that that hexagon needs to be very strategically placed. If you're just using maybe some fabrics at home, maybe you're picking up the pattern and a pack of those pre-cut double-sided fusible hexis, you can just be maximizing that fabric. But because I wanted to have a very specific spot here, we're kind of really eyeballing that. You know, you're trying to maximize that. And then we'll just cut just off to the side. It doesn't need to be a specific measurement by any means. We will be leaving at least 1/4 inch all the way around our shape, so make sure you are leaving at least that much distance. You'll do that same process. You'll go ahead and fussy cut your fabric until you have each of your petals. I believe there's a total of 10, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, yes, on that one. Of our green, again, we'll just be using our instructions to cut that to a specific size, but there's one other thing we're going to be doing. Because this will end up on here, and in order to turn this whole thing through, we're going to put a little slit right there. And just grab the middle. Don't go too far with that slit. We don't want anything kind of out in the corners there. I don't think you need to be too precise about that. I just put a slit in there. But the first thing we want to do is, because we have a fusible product, we want to take advantage of that. It's really nice when we have less things moving around with our project, and we can actually have that nice and secure. Let me grab this out. This is the applique sheet from Fons & Porter, and it's really been one of my go-tos. In fact, it was as well with the fold and stitch wreath, and I'm finding it useful again with this product. So I will just lay this out, and I'm going to try to center that so that I'm reducing. I want to see floral right back here, right? I don't want to see the white. So I'm just trying to bias that. So I make sure I have at least 1/4 inch from point to point here. And then we're going to cover that up. We don't want to iron that down right now with the iron straight on, because this is fusible too. You want to make sure you're covering that up and give a good press. And you're going to want to press this both from this side and then flip it over and do it from the opposite side. What I found when using these hexagons is they are so dense. The heat from just this side is not activating the glue on the other side. So I'm going to iron that like that, flip it over, and iron it from this side as well. And then go ahead and let that cool down. And then you'll want to remove that once that's cooled down. Now, I'm just going to let that cool down. What I found when I get ready to sew all this together is a zipper foot is really been my best friend. So I've got that in my machine. Let's see, what presser foot is that? That's a 4D, and I've got my needle all the way to the left. At this point, you don't need to have a coordinating thread in there. I have that in there already loaded, but not necessary. But hey, why not put that in there if I know that's coming up? So you can see I can just peel this away. My applique pressing sheet is clean. There's no residue on there, and I'm going to repeat that process. Once that's done, you're going to take your top fabric. Of course, it's got the slit in it, and this is right side up, and we'll have right sides together. If you feel inclined at this point that you want to just put in a little bit of a pin here and there, that's fine. We're going to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew as close as I can. That's why my zipper foot is in. My needle is as far left as it can be. And my whole mission is just to sew along the exact side of that, shorten your stitch length, so that way I'm more likely to hit those corners where I want to hit them, and I'm adding more thread because I'm going to turn this thing through and it's going to feel some stress. The more stitches in there, the better. All right, let's head over to that machine and we're going to sew our hexie together. Okay, so now we can trim this up. You could eyeball that. I like precision. I'm going to grab my favorite 6.5 by 12.5, and I've got my dash line here, and I just lay that right along the edge. I like that. And we'll just trim this up all the way around, and then we'll turn it through. I can see I should have grabbed my spinning mat here, but that's okay. We already have a lot on the table. Okay, once you've done that, this is where I talked about turning it through, and that's what that slit's for. So just kind of push it through. It's going to want to resist that a little bit. It's all right. I'm already looking for my point turner. I'm like, I can already see I want these points turned out perfectly. I can get them pretty well But you can imagine you want these to be just a really sharp edge, very finished. The clover point turner, we've done over this so many times. You've seen the videos. The point is here if you want that. Maybe you're doing curves, maybe on a different project. Has a really nice curve there. Clover notions are made in Japan. I love the craftsmanship of just clover notions. I love them. We've got wonder clips here and the clover fine pins, and I just find myself consistently reaching for clover notions. Now remember, this is fusible. So what I love about that is that once we have everything turned out where we want it, we can come back and really close most of that opening up. And it's going to be held down because it's double-sided fusible. I love that aspect of these pre-cut hexis. Look at that. And we've really kind of closed that up. So that's our back, and this is going to be our top portion. And now you're like, okay, now we gotta, how are we going to do this? How are we going to cover that up? That's where the applique comes in. Inside Christine's pattern, she has you, there's another template shape. In fact, I've got that here, and I just made mine because I knew I was going to make a lot of these. I didn't want to obviously cut into my pattern, and so I just grab a piece of the heavy-duty cut-right freezer paper. That is my absolute go-to anytime I'm making templates, whether they're for a project like this. It could be doing applique, because what I like that it's nice and rigid. So we'll get our applique fabric. I've got a package of heat and bond. One package is plenty to do at least one of the fold and stitch blooms, and maybe more. Once you have that, you have your fusible on the back of your fabric, cut it to that exact size mentioned in the pattern, and we'll just lay on our hexagon template, and now we'll just trace around that. That can be with any pen you want, or friction, whichever. I've learned to, there was a day where I just laid the ruler down and cut that, and there's too many times I've cut my template. Now I've learned to just trace that on, and that way my template's not getting just a little bit smaller every time, because I'm trimming a little bit of that away. And again, I'll grab for a ruler and give that a cut. So clever. She also has, Christine also has the fold and stitch leaf topper. Look for that one coming up soon. I have been having a lot of fun learning how to make that one and figuring out the right collection for it. So that's going to be coming your way soon. So I'd already cut one, but I wanted to show you the process of how we make them. Easiest way to release heat and bond, just fold this back, and that should release pretty readily. There we go. Here it comes. And now you're just, oh, you know what? That one needed a little bit more heat. Sometimes that happens to me. What I feel, I wish you could feel this, is I feel a bumpiness on this paper. I should not feel that. If you feel that, that means the glue did not transfer from this paper onto that fabric. And all that means is you need to go back and heat that up again and let the glue completely transfer. Sometimes that happens if I didn't quite get my iron hot enough. I got anxious, I turned it on, and I didn't let it do its thing, right? Let's see if this one's ready to go, and we can peel that one off and use that one instead. See how that has a complete transfer, and this is just as smooth as can be. So that happens sometimes, and if that happens to you, stop and re-iron that. Okay, now let's clean up just a touch. Now you can imagine your whole goal is to just place this applique on and have the same amount of distance around and iron that down. I will set my machine up for a zigzag stitch. Now color does matter, and you might want to think about what's on the back of your project. I just have a pink both in the top and in the back because I think that could work well for both. But let's say you have a very significant color on the back that's different than on the front here, then you're going to want to put, you know, your top thread and your bobbin thread may be a different color. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up for a zigzag. You can see here as we zoom in, we're just going to be stitching all the way around our applique to secure that down to the top, and we'll be repeating that step for all 10 of our kind of blooms and then sewing those together. But let's first, let me get that set up, and I will be over at the sewing machine to do that zigzag stitch with you. Okay, that step, you just repeat that 10 times over. Then, once you have that, let me get a little bit of room to show you. This is again similar. I love it kind of when you've done a project and then there's something different but similar. So you're not like, what are we doing? You're like, I remember this. The fold and stitch wreath is kind of like that, where you're making this shape. I've made some other ones. I've got that over here. Inside her pattern, you will create, it's basically a larger hexagon, and then she has you cut a side off. What that's going to do for you is that's kind of your template. This is where a temporary marking pen will come into play. I'll be using my friction pen. With all of your hexagons with the applique side up, mark them all at the same time. We're just going to draw that line, and we're just going to draw this line here. And just like I said, do them all at the same time. The one thing that's key, and the one thing that I thought was intuitive, was that somehow I was going to make those lines touch. No, you're not. Basically, if you take this hexie and you just put that to the back of this, now we're going to go to the machine. Let me get out of my zigzag. I'm just going to go back to a straight stitch, and we're just going to sew on that drawn line. Here's a pro tip from our sewing room. Instead of starting right here and stopping right here, you're going to see that on this. Start here, back up to the edge, come down to the edge, and then reverse and cut here. That way, that little bit of thread that we see once we cut our thread will be back up in here and kind of hidden kind of in those folds. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Okay. And Christine recommends that you go ahead and do this in pairs instead of just adding on. So if you look at this and you kind of open that up just like that, now the next one coming in would be again to the back side. But instead of just adding on, she's recommending that we do this in pairs. So I have another pair that's done just like that, right? So that line is there. Now I want to show you something here. You don't have to worry about trying to remove that mark line because it's going to be covered up. It's in that corner. If that totally bugs you, you can do that, but no need to. Now here's my next bloom. So again, right side together. I'm going to sew this. I want to show you as much of this project as I can so you have no mystery of how this goes together. So let me go sew this and I'll be right back. So I have those two sections of 2 sewn together. And then I also, before video, I had 3 other sections of 2 that I just sewed together. So now, let me just get some space. We repeat the process here of what we've been doing. We'll just right side together with this, right side together with this one. And let me sew those together. I wanted to just have you see how this bloom comes together. Again, let me go sew that. And then I want to talk to you about stitching this together. So you're going to need some coordinating thread, a little bit of hand sewing. Unlike the fold and stitch wreath where we gave you kind of a machine sewing option and hand sewing, this is definitely hand sewing. So I will sew that, and in the meantime you can thread a needle and whatever coordinating thread you'd like. I'll be right back. So this is what this looks like, and you're like, that doesn't look right. That's where you just definitely use that iron to be pressing your blooms open. You don't need to be shy about that, and that's when it'll really start to take shape and be laying much flatter for you on the table. We definitely pressed ours quite a bit. And as I mentioned before I started sewing, this is where there's a little bit of hand sewing, not huge. And this is also an opportunity. Christine mentions this in her pattern, and I'll point that out. Hopefully you can see that. You might be able to see that kind of here or maybe inside the pattern to a certain extent. Some people add, I don't know if you can see that right there from the overhead camera. You see those little beads? You can really embellish these places, or you can just sew those certain sections together. I don't have any beads with me, but I think the idea is very fun to think about that. Maybe some faceted beads that really pick up the light, especially if this is on maybe a dining room table. Okay, once you have this, it's going to be probably a little bit easier for me to point out our sample here. And she talks specifically about this in the pattern. So we have our shapes like this. And she talks about initially just connecting the this part right here, where you're just kind of folding this into itself and securing those first. Now I've got my green thread in a needle, and you could certainly be doing 2 strands if you felt you needed that. I've got, I believe, just a single strand here. So she recommends starting in this center portion just like this. So you can start on the inside. Hopefully you can see this from the overhead camera. We'll try to zoom in. I'll try to keep my hands out of the way. You can bury that knot there on the inside, because by the time you roll this in like that, you're not going to see that anymore. And you're just securing multiple, you're just going to go multiple times, as many times as you think, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, until you have that completely secured. And again, you'll do your best to bury that needle on the underside. Just like that. And then if you're trying to close that off, you might be able to just come inside here. Like that. And you'll do that all the way around that middle portion first. I'm gonna bury that thread on the underside there, just like that. I've talked about this before. I'm looking for a pair of scissors about you kind of make it work. That's one of those things where it's not as easily understood of like, how do I do this? Do your best. Do whatever you need to do to hide your knots and where you began and end. Okay, so initially when you sew these together, they're going to be kind of closed up, but then here, and she mentions in her pattern, and I believe she's having us measure back about an inch. Once this is sewn together now, and it's almost easier to mark them when they're sewn together. Now you'll get your smaller ruler. I think I put my friction pen, oh, there's my friction pen. And we're just going to measure back about an inch. And you want to do this on every single one of those. Over here, actually you might even want to do it more up on the top so you can see that. And here, I'm just going to kind of eyeball that right now. But that's where you will stitch again. Now maybe you want to do a different thread because this was green. Maybe here you'll want to do a white. But you're going to stitch that, and that's what's going to create this kind of fluted look that is really kind of what makes it bloom. So it's really a fun process. I enjoy hand sewing. You know, I obviously love sewing on my machine, but I love the little bit of handwork. And again, if you choose to use beads or something else, buttons, and kind of add even more, embellish it and more fun. So thank you for giving me part of your day. And thank you to Christine Poor for allowing me to bring you a good amount of information about how to make the fold and stitch blooms. Let a friend know. Grab a kit if you love the Bloom On collection. Subscribe, and I'll see you soon on another video.